Every 2 weeks, when my direct deposit hits, I already know exactly where most of it is going. Not to my student loans, not to my student loans, not to the little jar on my kitchen counter where I'd been collecting change since college, telling myself one day I'll finally take that trip to Portugal I've been promising myself for years. It goes to my family. My name is Kelsey. I'm 32 years old. I'm a senior financial analyst at a mid-sized logistics company in Denver, Colorado. I have a 401k, a decent credit score, and exactly one plant on my windowsill that I've somehow managed to keep alive for 3 years. On paper, I look like I have it together. But for the past 6 years, I've been the invisible backbone of a family that never once asked me if I was okay. My brother Kyle is 35. He's never held a job for longer than 8 months. There's always a reason. The manager was unfair. The commute was too long. The company didn't appreciate him. He lives in my childhood home in Colorado Springs with my parents, 45 minutes south of me. My dad, who took early retirement at 62, has a pension that covers maybe half of what the household needs. My mom has fibromyalgia. Her medications alone run close to $400 a month even with insurance. I understood, early on, that I was the one who was going to have to make up the gap. What I didn't understand was that the gap would grow every single year. It started small, 100 here, 200 there. Then it was the car insurance because my brother let his lapse. Then it was the water heater that blew out one February and they didn't have the $1,500 to replace it. Then it was the property taxes. Then it was my brother's dental work. $4,000 I wired to my parents' account on the Tuesday afternoon while eating a sad desk lunch, telling myself it was just this once. It was never just this once. I never talked about it at work. I never talked about it with my friends. The few people who knew thought I was being generous, and I let them think that because the truth was more complicated, and I didn't have the words for it yet. The truth was that I didn't feel like I had a choice. My parents had raised me to believe that family takes care of family, that you don't turn your back, that blood means something. I had absorbed that belief so completely that it didn't even feel like a belief anymore. It just felt like gravity. Meanwhile, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment I could technically afford something nicer than, eating out less than my coworkers, skipping concerts and weekend trips, and putting off buying a car that didn't have a check engine light that came on every third Tuesday. I had goals. I had a spreadsheet. Because of course I did. I'm a financial analyst. Where I tracked what I called my freedom number. The amount I needed saved to put a down payment on a house of my own. A real house. A yard. A place where I didn't share walls with a guy who played bass guitar at 11 p.m. I'd been adding to that spreadsheet for 4 years. The number kept getting further away. The dinner where everything changed happened in October. My parents had asked me to come down for the weekend. Mom said she missed me. Kyle was going to be there. It would be nice, she said. Just family. I made a sweet potato casserole because it's my dad's favorite, drove down on a Saturday, and walked into the house where I grew up. Kyle was in the living room in sweatpants watching football. He'd been, between opportunities, as he liked to say, for about 5 months at that point. My mom was in the kitchen. My dad was at the table already, a beer open in front of him. We ate dinner. It was fine. And then my mom, who had a glass of wine and was in that soft, chatty mood that wine sometimes gave her, looked across the table at me and said something that I still hear sometimes when I'm trying to fall asleep. She said, "You know, Kelsey, I keep waiting for you to bring someone home. You're not getting any younger." I told her I was fine. I was focused on work. And then Kyle, who hadn't paid a utility bill in years, Kyle, whose car insurance I had paid for 8 of the past 24 months, Kyle leaned back in his chair and grinned at me and said, "Maybe nobody wants her mom. She's married to her spreadsheets." My dad laughed. Not a polite, uncomfortable laugh. A real one. I sat there with a forkful of the casserole I had made and felt something shift in my chest. Not break. More like unlock. I put my fork down. I looked at my brother and I said, very calmly, "That's interesting coming from someone whose car insurance I paid last March." The table went quiet. My mom said, "Kelsey." And I said, "No, I'm curious." Who's been writing the checks for this family for the past 6 years? Kyle said I was being dramatic. My dad said this wasn't the time. I said, you know what? You're right. It's not the time. It's been past time. I drove back to Denver that night. I didn't finish dinner. I left the rest of the casserole on the counter because I didn't want to take anything back with me from that house. I cried in the car on I-25 for about 20 minutes, then I stopped. Something had cracked open and I needed to look at what was inside. When I got home, I opened my spreadsheet. I did something I had never let myself do before. I added up every single transfer, every Venmo, every time I had said, don't worry about paying me back. It took me almost 2 hours. The number was $61,420. Over 6 years. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and I just looked at that number on my laptop screen for a long time. I tried to think about what that money could have been. The down payment I never made. The Portugal trip I kept promising myself. The emergency fund that would have let me breathe instead of just survive every time my car made a noise or a medical bill showed up unexpectedly. $61,000. And my brother thought I was married to my spreadsheets. I went to work that Monday and did my job. I came home. I made a budget, not a new one. I'd been budgeting for years, but this one was different. This one had a column I had never made before. It was labeled Mine. My phone rang that week. It was my dad. He wanted to talk about Kyle's car. The transmission was going. They'd gotten an estimate of $2,200, and Kyle didn't have it. Did I think I could help this one time? I told him I couldn't. There was a pause. He said, Kelsey, we're family. I said, I know. That's why I've given you $61,000 since I was 26 years old. I added it up this week. Another pause. Then he said that number sounded like an exaggeration. I said I could email him the spreadsheet. He didn't ask me to. After I hung up, I went to my closet and got out the accordion folder where I keep paper records of everything. Old tax returns, lease agreements, pay stubs. I pulled out my bank statements going back to 2018. I had printed them once for a loan inquiry and never thrown them out. I sat down and highlighted every single family transfer, line by line, pink highlighter. Very methodical. Very much the kind of thing my brother would call being married to a spreadsheet. By the end of the folder, my hands were a little pink from the highlighter cap I kept forgetting to put back. The number held. 3 weeks later, I got a call I was not expecting. It was from my bank's fraud department. There had been an application submitted in my name for a personal loan. $20,000. The application had gone through the pre-approval stage. Someone had used my social security number, my address, my employment information, all accurate, all things my parents could have known from years of me being the person who filled out forms and handled paperwork when they needed help. The application had been submitted from an IP address in Colorado Springs. I felt the kind of cold that doesn't have anything to do with temperature. I asked the fraud representative to walk me through everything. I asked her to flag the application, freeze any further processing, and start an investigation. I was professional. I was calm. I was using the same voice I use in meetings when someone brings data I disagree with, and I need to make my case without escalating. When I hung up, I sat in my car in the parking garage of my office building for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I watched the clock on my dashboard. Then I called a lawyer. Her name was Diane. She specialized in financial fraud and identity theft cases. I'd actually found her from a coworker who'd gone through something similar with a former business partner. I had her on speed dial before I ever thought I'd need her. One of those things you do just in case and hope you never actually use. I met with Diane 2 days later. I brought the accordion folder. I brought my spreadsheet printed out. I brought the fraud department's reference number. I laid everything on her conference table and explained the 6-year arc of what had happened as clearly and factually as I could. She looked at everything quietly. Then she looked at me. She said, "Do you want to pursue this?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Just so you're prepared, this will almost certainly involve your brother and possibly your parents. It won't be clean." I said, "I know." She started the paperwork. The bank completed their investigation in about 6 weeks. The loan application was confirmed fraudulent. The information had been submitted using a combination of my personal data and what the investigators believed was a fabricated authorization. My brother's name surfaced during the investigation. He was formally charged with identity theft and fraudulent loan application. He denied everything for about 3 weeks, then his public defender advised him to cooperate. My parents called me 12 times during those 6 weeks. I let most of them go to voicemail. I listened to every message. In the first few calls, my mom was crying, asking me to drop it, telling me I was destroying the family. In the later calls, my dad's voice was quieter, and he said something I didn't expect. He said, "We shouldn't have let it get to this." I know that. I didn't call him back. Not yet. The day the investigation closed and the charges were confirmed, I drove to a trailhead outside of Denver that I used to go to when I needed to think. There's a bench about a mile in with a view of the Front Range. I sat there for a while. A dog came over and put its head in my lap, and the owner apologized, and I said, "Please don't worry about it, it's fine." I scratched the dog's ears. I looked at the mountains. I had been carrying something for 6 years that I'd never put down long enough to see how heavy it was, and now, for the first time, my hands were empty. I thought about my brother, not with anger, not in that moment, more with something that felt like grief, like looking at a photograph of something that's gone. We had been close as kids. He used to drive me to school in his old pickup truck and let me pick the radio station. I had loved him in the uncomplicated way you love someone, before you understand what love sometimes costs. I didn't know how to reconcile that Kyle with the one who had submitted a loan application in my name. I'm not sure I ever will. But I also finally understood that reconciling it was not my job. Some things don't have a neat explanation. Some things are just what they are. I flew to Lisbon in February, not Portugal the someday. Portugal, the actual ticket, the actual carry-on packed in my actual closet, the actual boarding pass on my phone. I had started, that November, to rebuild the savings account with the rigor I had previously been spending on other people's lives. I set up automatic transfers on every payday to a high-yield account I named mine, the same label I had given the column in my budget. It was not glamorous. It was a spreadsheet, but it was mine. In Lisbon, I ate pastéis de nata 3 days in a row. I walked until my feet hurt. I sat in a cafe near the waterfront for 2 hours on a Tuesday with nothing but a coffee and a paperback and no one calling me to ask for money. I looked out at the Tagus River and felt something I hadn't felt in so long. I had almost forgotten it was supposed to be the default state. I felt okay. Not grateful for what had happened. I don't think you have to perform gratitude for hard things to prove you've healed from them. Just okay. Like myself. Like a person whose life belonged to her. I'd been back in Denver for 3 months now. I'm working with a realtor. The freedom number is within reach. Genuinely within reach, not spreadsheet math reach. Sometime next spring, if things stay on track, I will put a down payment on a house that has a yard. My dad and I have talked twice, short calls. Careful. There's a lot of ground between where we were and wherever we might get to eventually, and I'm not interested in pretending that ground doesn't exist. My mom sent me a birthday card in January. She wrote that she was proud of me. I put it in a drawer. I'm not sure what to do with that yet. My brother and I haven't spoken. Some of my coworkers have figured out, obliquely, that I went through something significant last year. They don't know the details. One of them, a woman named Tasha who sits 2 cubes over and has the best snack drawer in the building, asked me once how I was really doing. I told her the truth. I said I was better than I'd been in years actually. She nodded like she understood, which made me think she had her own accordion folder somewhere, full of her own highlighted bank statements. If you've been the person in your family who says yes, because no never felt like an option, I want you to know something I had to learn the hard way. The money is real. The pattern is real. The grief of realizing what you've been participating in is real. And the life that's waiting on the other side of that realization, the one that's actually yours, that's real too. You just have to be willing to finally do the math. I used to think that being a good person meant never saying no to the people who raised you. That loyalty looked like sacrifice. That love, real love, meant absorbing whatever your family needed without keeping score. It took me 6 years and $61,000 to understand that I had confused love with fear. Not fear of my family, exactly. Fear of what would happen to me if I stopped. Fear that the version of myself who said no was someone cold, someone selfish, someone who didn't deserve to be loved back. I had been running from that version of myself for so long that I never stopped to ask whether the person I was running toward, the one who said yes every time, who wired money on her lunch break, who skipped her own vacation to cover someone else's car insurance, whether she was actually happy, whether she was even real. She wasn't. She was just exhausted. What Kyle said at that dinner table, maybe nobody wants her, it was cruel, but it wasn't what broke something open in me. What broke it open was my parents laughing. Because in that moment I understood, with a clarity I hadn't been able to find in 6 years of spreadsheets, that the arrangement I had been participating in was never really about need. It was about permission. I had given my family permission over and over to treat my time and my money and my choices as resources that existed for their use. And they had accepted that permission without question, because why wouldn't they? Actions have weight, not in some abstract cosmic sense. Just in the very real, practical sense that what we do consistently tells the people around us what we believe we're worth. Every time I transferred money without being asked, every time I said don't worry about paying me back, every time I answered the phone at 10 p.m. and talked someone through a crisis that wasn't mine to solve, I was communicating something. I was saying, my comfort matters less than yours, my future is more negotiable than your present. And they believed me. Because I had never given them a reason not to. What changed wasn't them. It was the moment I decided to believe something different about myself. Rebuilding after that looked nothing like I expected. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a single conversation or a single decision. It was a series of small, quiet acts of self-respect, setting up that automatic transfer labeled mine. Calling Diane, sitting in my car for 11 minutes and letting myself feel the weight of what had happened before I decided what to do next. Discipline is not the same as punishment. I wasn't punishing my family, I was simply, finally, directing my resources toward my own life, with the same intentionality I had always directed toward everyone else's. Kelsey in Lisbon, eating the same pastry 3 days in a row because she could, because nobody needed anything from her. That wasn't the beginning of the story. She was the result of it. She was what happened when one person stopped apologizing for taking up space. If you are the person in your family who always figures it out, who always comes through, who has never once been allowed the dignity of a real no, I'm not going to tell you it's easy to change that. It isn't. The guilt is real. The grief is real. Some of the relationships you thought were unconditional will turn out to have been conditional on your usefulness, and that is one of the lonelier things a person can discover about the people they love. But the life on the other side of that discovery belongs entirely to you, and that is not a small thing. That is actually everything.